Hello and welcome. This is Amanda Howe with Iatric Systems. I will be your moderator today. If you should need any technical assistance during the webinar, please refer to the information located in the questions section of your control panel. This webinar will be recorded for quality purposes. We do encourage you to participate in today's webinar by entering any questions or comments in the questions section. Please feel free to enter your questions at any time during the webinar. After the webinar, you will have the opportunity to fill out a short survey to tell us how we did. This survey will appear when you leave the webinar. For your time, your name will be entered into a drawing to win a $100 Amazon.com gift card. And all of these drawings are held at the end of each month. I'd like to formally welcome you to our presentation, Best Practices in System Migration Planning. Our speakers today are Joe Saines, Dan Weeker, Tom Harlan, and Steve Prowse. Joe Saines is a seasoned healthcare IT professional with 30 years of experience leading information technology initiatives. While working for providers and now as a consultant, Joe has led numerous system implementations, EHR migrations, upgrades, advanced clinical initiatives, and meaningful use programs. Dan Weeker is a certified project management professional with over 9 years of experience working in a healthcare IT setting. Dan has led successful implementations for EHR upgrades, electronic physician workflow, interoperability initiatives, and meaningful use Stage 1 and Stage 2 attestations. Tom Harlan has been a data repository and NPR consultant with Iatric Systems since 2012. He has more than 20 years of SQL experience as well as 10 years of healthcare reporting experience, extracting data from a variety of HIS systems. His IT positions have ranged from programmer to manager to chief technology officer. And now I'll turn it over to Joe to get us started and introduce our guest speaker, Steve Prowse.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. Before I jump into the agenda, as Amanda said, I'd like to introduce a special guest with us today, Stephen Prowse, who is the Director of Applications at the University of Maryland Upper Chesapeake Health System. The Upper Chesapeake Health System includes 2 acute care non-for-profit hospitals, Upper Chesapeake Medical Center and Harford Memorial Hospital in Havre de Grace, Maryland. They have a combined licensed bed of 267 with 26,000 total admissions, 93,000 emergency department visits, 192,000 outpatient visits. They have about 3,200 employees and about 650 physicians. So welcome and thank you for participating with us today, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's get to the agenda for today. What we're going to be doing is spending the first part of the presentation going over a high-level overview of some EHR migration best practices. I don't want to spend too much time on those. I'm just going to really go over them in summary so that we can move on to the second part of the presentation, which is really a deeper dive and a focus on 3 areas for success, which include testing, workflow optimization, and reporting. And then we'll wrap up with a question and answer session. So again, I want to give an overview of some of these topics ranging from project organization, governance, resource planning, communication, project risk, staff training, go live and cutover, and post go live. And then as I said, the 3 areas that we'll be focusing on is testing, workflow redesign, interoperability, and reporting. So let's just jump right into project organization, charter, and governance. You want to start out of the gate with a very clear vision throughout the organization and have everyone aligned around why you're doing an EHR migration and what are the expectations. So you want to make sure that everyone understands the amount of work involved, the meetings that are going to have to take place, the deadlines. Just want to have everyone in the organization behind you and on the same page with a clear and consistent vision as to why we're doing what we're doing. Want to have your project leadership and oversight set up so that it's either a steering committee or an IT steering committee, and you want to make sure that your various application areas are representative. This is just an example there, the picture of one way of doing it, where you see an executive sponsorship, technology, IT, marketing. It includes training and then all the various areas within the organization. So we just want to make sure that all the areas are well represented. Want to work on your budget. You know, the finance people are very interested in making sure that you remain on budget and that everything's accounted for. There's a lot of project-related costs when you're undertaking EHR migration. There's the cost to the EMR vendor, consultants, third-party solutions, hardware, infrastructure, networking, equipment, end-user devices, any additional staffing, whether it's temporary or permanent, paying people overtime, getting your physicians involved and possibly having to pay the independent physician time, interface cost, other vendor systems, training, education, travel. There's just a whole host of various budget items that you need to really put on a budget and make sure that you work through that budget and keep it up to date. Project timelines and work plans, certainly you want to follow a good project management methodology and process, put together a very detailed work plan, have a good project charter, a good scope document, want to identify how you're going to document your issues and classify them. Part of the project management process is also the escalation process. Want to have that well defined. Where are you going to keep all your documents? Is it going to be in a central location such as SharePoint or some other tool that you might have for project management? And that leads into identifying the project requirements. So these include both technical requirements and scoping. You want to make sure that your team does a good job of scoping all the various requirements of what you want to achieve and what you're trying to accomplish with the migration. Just as important, you want to identify all the various risks involved with the project, and we'll go into that in a minute. But that's a very important component to organizing the project. Want to identify all the project members. That's another area that we'll dive into a little bit. But all the various roles and responsibility of each of the project members. You're going to have a whole army of folks working on this EHR migration. So it's very important to organize that up front, identify the members and their roles. I talked a little bit about the escalation path with the project management process and the project management rules, but you want to make sure you have a good escalation path defined and policies and procedures documented. So when issues arise, you have a good, clear method of working through those. So let's talk a little bit about project risk. So this is huge. This is very important and a huge key success factor to an EHR migration. A lot of the project risk can be identified up front. Make sure that you have the legal responsibilities of the vendor, customer, and the third parties clearly specified somewhere. Want to make sure that the risks are identified in terms of safety, so that when you design the system, keep in mind some of your guiding principles that you want to have is that you will not harm a patient, and also that you'll keep the financial integrity of the organization intact. So that's the impact of the revenue cycle and patient privacy and security, again, in terms of the design of your system. So you want to make sure that folks feel good about identifying risk and bring them up to leadership. As a little cartoon there illustrates, you don't want folks not feeling like they can't identify or talk about things that are going wrong. Those are typically the things that nag at you, and sooner or later, in the end, are going to come back to haunt you or bite you. So we want to make sure that there's a process in place where folks can vocalize those and that they're identified, and you have a good risk management process in place. So next component is resource planning. As I said, you're going to have just a whole army of individuals working on an EHR migration, whether it's project management, IT staffing, you're going to need analysts. I'm calling here solution architects, or folks that can build the system, but just as important, you need subject matter experts that can guide the build team and provide input and direction on how the system should be built. You'll need physician champions. Physicians are a huge part of being successful when you migrate to a new EHR. You'll have trainers, super users, at the elbow support individuals. These are folks that when you go live, they're right there, boots on the ground, helping folks navigate and use the new system. We'll talk a little bit about go live support in a few minutes. You also need good technical engineers to set up all the servers and work through printing and those various technical obstacles. Also, legacy support. Want to make sure that you identify, what are you going to do with a legacy system, and who's going to support that system after you move to the new EHR, and set those expectations up front. Communication plans. This is a fun part of the project. You want to work with your marketing department and rally the entire organization around what you're trying to do, create some buzz in the organization, create a project name and a theme, engage everybody. You can't over-communicate enough, so communicate, communicate, communicate. They stay there. That includes developing an intranet site, newsletters, flyers, videos, screensavers, anything you can think of to constantly get the message out as to what's happening, what are the expectations, what are the accomplishments, publish the key dates, milestones. You can even do some clinical readiness demonstrations where you invite your clinical staff to either an auditorium or you go out to the various nursing units and you demonstrate the system prior to when you go live, just to show it off and to let folks see what you're working on. You can come up with some kind of countdown display, put that in the cafeteria or throughout the organization so everyone knows how close you are to the go live. It's important to have your executives knowledgeable about what's going on, so I encourage you to develop an executive status dashboard of some kind. This could be a very high-level monthly dashboard with each of the areas represented, possibly identifying the key accomplishments, what's coming up in the next 30 days, and then any issues that you might be dealing with or any obstacles or challenges. Just a very high-level dashboard for the executive and senior leadership team. And then be prepared to deal with staff anxiety and concerns. This is a major undertaking for an organization, and folks are just going to be anxious about what's going on. So be prepared to deal with that. Make it fun. Have some great events. Staff training is another huge component around an EHR migration. This is both training your IT staff and your non-IT staff, so all of the hundreds and hundreds of folks that are going to now be using the new system. You have to determine what approach you're going to take with this. Are you going to train the trainer, have super users, or you're going to get a vendor to provide the training? It takes a long time to identify the trainers and actually pull them out of staffing. That's a huge commitment for each of the areas to identify who in their area will be a super user or a trainer. These folks will have to go to training, so they should really be pulled out of their schedules and committed to the project, and set that expectation up very early on. Can't talk about training rooms enough. So many organizations are tight on space, but I've seen many organizations underestimate how many training rooms you're going to need. And it takes time to identify these spaces, set them up, put the equipment in there, test it, and have a good system for having folks schedule themselves to these rooms. I have a bullet down there about staff scheduling and registration. So very important, to talk about how you're going to schedule all of your staff to training. You're going to have a tool where individuals can just self-schedule themselves. Our manager's going to do this. You're going to have a centralized registration area to make sure that everyone is scheduled, so that they can plan accordingly and get out of their individual work schedules and unit schedules. Are you going to do some kind of proficiency testing after training? So is this, many organizations don't provide a log-on until users have been able to show that they are proficient, or that they at least are able to pass a test and able to use the system in a, as a beginner, and then they can get a log-on. There's also all the logistics around training. So that's a huge undertaking as far as the training rooms, coordinating all the activity. As I said, there's a security involved, possibly depending upon where the rooms are, transportation, getting folks to and from the training if your training facility is located off campus. There's any dietary or housekeeping issues that might need to be addressed as well with training rooms. A lot of logistics involved in the training. And then there's go live and cutover, another huge component of EHR migrations. So you want to have a very detailed cutover plan, and you want to review this several times throughout the process. This is an activity that takes hours, and as a team you just sit down and you go through the cutover minute by minute of the day for however long you identify that cutover phase is going to take, just so that it's almost like a trial run, and the entire group goes through the cutover plan step by step. It's usually thousands of steps long. I want to talk about a command center structure and how you're going to put this together. So a place where folks can come and report problems, maybe a team assembled to work on issues and to man hotlines. It takes a lot of planning and coordination to build the command center and to schedule it so that it's manned. You want to have a command center coordinator and make sure that all the various roles are roles and responsibilities for everyone that's in the command center. They know what they're supposed to be doing while they're in there. Again, there's, just as in training, there's a lot of logistical planning that goes on to a command center. All the support services involved with it, whether it's dietary or housekeeping or telecommunications. You want to make sure that all the phones are working the way they're supposed to work. If there's a phone tree, or if calls go from one phone to another, how you're going to set that up, and all of the various logistical things that go on with setting that up. You'll need to address, as I said before, the at-the-elbow support. These are the folks, and whether you outsource that and have a company come in and provide all those individuals, or again, you pull those folks out of staffing. Maybe they're your super users. Maybe you're probably likely going to need additional folks in addition to your super users. But these are the individuals that are scheduled for about 2 weeks, around the clock, at all the units in all the various areas, right at the elbow, ready to provide that personalized one-on-one support with folks that are trying to navigate the new system after the migration. Want to have a good method at the command center to identify issues, track them, and make sure that you track these issues so as they get resolved, you can mark them off. Daily updates to the organization, whether these are done at auditoriums, either through a daily newsletter, a flash report, anything to update the organization daily as to what's going on during the go live. And it's important to have your leadership round throughout the organization. So just don't let them stay up in the senior leadership area. Have them out and about and visible throughout the organization. And finally, just want to go through the post-go live activities. Again, track issues through resolution, have a process where folks accept the system, do a post-mortem review. Did we meet our goals? Did we meet the scope? Document what went well, what didn't go well, what improvements are there that we could have done. And then, of course, you move into post-go live optimization, which is continuous. So at this point, I wanted to focus the presentation. So that was just a high level of various topics, but now I want to do a deeper dive into 3 areas that I mentioned. The first one is around testing. Can't underestimate how much testing and the importance of testing there is to be successful and be really passionate about this. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Steve and Dan, who will talk about a real-life example around an organization as Upper Chesapeake that is migrating and the parallel and integrated testing that they are going through.
Well, thanks, Joe, and thanks again for being here today, Steve.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Joe.
Steve, your organization went through a full EHR migration about 5 years ago, and you're currently going through a major upgrade. You guys must be experts by now.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but we're certainly no strangers to the process. We converted from, like you said, one system to another 5 years ago, and thinking that would be the last time in my career we do it, and lo and behold, we're here again doing it.
Well, in your experience, how important do you feel the testing phase plays into the migration or upgrade process?
Well, that's a good question. Testing, as I see it, is really the measurement of progress. It typically comes at that halfway mark during your project, where out of the testing, you really have an understanding of your readiness. If anything was going to change, if you were going to end up extending your timeline, you're going to learn that at the testing phase. You know, a lot of times you have your checkpoint meetings, you have your various steering meetings, and you'll hear from the attendees one of 2 things usually. We're doing great, everything's on target, couldn't be better. Or you hear the opposite. It's a disaster, we need more resources, we need much more time. But testing is really that point where I see you can actually get the objective data out of where you really are. And when you come out of testing, you either have a level of confidence, yep, we're on target, we're ready to get where we need to go, or you have a decreased level of confidence and you need to kind of make adjustments.
Well, Steve, that's a great perspective. I can't tell you how many times personally I've heard those expressions in my own experience. There really is no middle ground, is there?
No, well, silence sometimes. Sometimes you don't hear anything at all. But absolutely, I agree with you.
If testing is so important, what impact do you feel would occur to the end user community if the testing phase was not performed thoroughly?
Well, I mean, testing is that one measurement to see how well the system's built and configured. In short, without adequate testing, you're going to have, potential for frustration across your end user community. After go live, the frustration can ultimately lead to provider dissatisfaction, patient dissatisfaction, and potentially patient harm. I mean, these systems that we use and test with are basically one of the ways that we deliver care. It's that important. Also in your testing phase, this is your one opportunity where you have a chance to see the end users interact with the system prior to bringing it live, so you can kind of gauge and get a sense of where any of the stumbling blocks may be. Should there be new functionality or new enhancements and you see your testers struggling with that, that's an area you can target when you get into your training phase.
So sometimes many hospitals elect to do multiple phases of testing, such as you mentioned an integration phase or a parallel or a user acceptance testing phase. What are your recommendations to that approach?
Well, the overall recommendation is to really perform as much testing as you can. And all throughout the project, your analyst team, your applications team should be testing as they build all throughout the project. You're going to get updates and priority packs and fixes all throughout the project, and that testing needs to happen throughout every stage. But you do need to have a timeout, and you need to have at least 2 coordinated testing events. And the first coordinated testing event is really your integrated testing. And integrated testing, as I see it, is really testing the inner workings of the systems. Are the modules communicating? Is pharmacy able to interact with the registration system in a way where you can actually look up patients? If someone goes and enters an order, a medication order, is that flowing to pharmacy? Is the pharmacist able to see that order? Are labels printing? Are barcodes printing? Is that order going and integrating to the nurse's MAR? Once the nurse administers that med, does it flow to the billing systems? And that's kind of the integrated testing. It's really, is the system breathing? Is the system well enough to get to the next step? And then you'll have what's called parallel testing. And we've just completed that phase here. And that's the process of actually getting the end users. The first stage, the integrated testing, typically is done by in our case, the applications, the IT team does that testing. And the parallel testing is done by the end users. And that's done in one of two ways typically. The first way is you can take a live patient situation, let's say a triage nurse, for example, that is triaging a patient and documenting in their EMR. They would actually finish that process, stop, and attempt to replicate that exact data in the test system. So on the back end, you could validate with the outcome what you expected. You can see how that might take time out of the care environment, and sometimes it can take a lot of resources to coordinate, but sometimes people choose that method. The method we chose is what I would call a controlled parallel test, where we actually took discharged patients that met certain criteria and encounters in the hospital that we felt covered about 80% of all the encounters. And we identified those charts, and we attempted to replicate that information from those encounters into the test system. And that's really the difference between the two.
So I guess it's safe to say that each phase builds upon one another. You know, you shouldn't move into parallel testing if the integration testing failed.
Oh yeah, if your integrated testing fails and you attempt to do parallel testing, it could potentially be a nightmare. They really build on one another. It's kind of like you know, a car. You could get in the car and try to go somewhere, but if your tires are flat and you have no gas in the car, you're going nowhere. And the other thing it will do is for your parallel testers, remember this is typically your end users. And if they get in the system that's not been fully integrated, that hasn't passed integrated testing, and they start running into issues and they struggle and they get frustrated, what's going to happen to them is they're going to lose confidence in the system. And that's going to spread. That decreased confidence is going to spread throughout the whole project. You do not want that.
Not at all. In fact, it really sounds like this is a major effort. What did your team do in order to coordinate these various testing events?
Well, the first thing we did is we realized that this was a major process. Now, we get updates all the time, and we kind of know how to test that. But we don't go through these type of updates every year, every 6 months. Sometimes you might work in your whole career in IT and never do a migration. So recognizing that it was that big and we might not have had the necessary experience or weren't as familiar with it, being that it was, you know, 5 years ago, we contracted with the professional services at Iatric, and they were able to quickly provide the expertise in coordinating the integrated and parallel testing. They helped us build the test scenarios. They coordinated the resources. They basically proctored the whole process for us, and that was a weight off of our shoulders because we had a second set of eyes looking at the system. They had more experience. They were doing it more often than we were every 5 years or so. And they were able to bring not only that expertise, but they actually had a best practice approach and a web-based tool actually that we were able to document all of our testing and outcomes in. So that was fantastic for us.
And how hard was it for your team to develop those testing scenarios?
It was pretty easy because most of the work we had Iatric do for us, the professional services team. We kind of recognized right away that a big part of this effort in testing was going to be to take these scenarios review the charts, and develop what we call the scenarios or the test scripts. That was a huge effort. So we asked Iatric to do that piece for us. But what our team did is we actually identified the real patients that we wanted to reproduce these scripts on. And after we did that, we pulled the charts. We identified the necessary documentation, whether they would be order history or medication history, and we were able to pull that in a secure way. We used a SharePoint site on our local internet that was secure, and we were able to work by creating the scenarios in that fashion. Not only that, once you get that, a big part of the effort that was a weight off of us was that this, in a system migration, you have multiple applications. You have a pharmacy, you have imaging, you have nursing, you have lab, you have billing, and each of those has its own project lead. In our case, we would use our business directors of those areas. So coordination had to be done to make sure that they agreed to these scenarios. They were really what was representative of what they needed to get out of testing. So Iatric took the lead in coordinating the review meetings and the final checkoff that these were the scenarios we were going to use. And it was a big part of the effort. It actually took much longer than the testing itself to get folks to kind of agree that this is the testing that we're going to do. Was a big piece of that entire testing engagement.
You mentioned earlier, Steve, that you guys used an electronic testing tool. I'm sure that most of our audience has completed their documentation, the old-fashioned way, passing folders or binders around to the person that was next in line, and then they'd complete their steps. How did that compare to documenting electronically?
Well, we did that process with our first migration. And the way that worked is just like you said. We would print, if you ever print a patient's chart out of an electronic system, it is hundreds of pages. And we would take that and we would have a scenario cover sheet in a huge folder, and we would pass that around the room. And then folks would document the status, whether they completed the scenario and what the outcome was. And at the end of that process, we kept that documentation around. At least we thought we did, for evidence, but it was hard to store. And ultimately, I believe we actually securely shredded it and got rid of it. So it's tough using the paper, and we did use the automated tool, which was a great benefit. It's kind of like moving from, the same reason why we wanted to move to the automated tool was the same reason we kind of got out of the paper chart world. Only one person can have it at a time, and there was no concurrency. So that was definitely a benefit.
And moving to EHRs, that's a whole other conversation. But it sounds like documenting electronically really helped you guys.
Oh yeah. At first, I was very skeptical. Testing in itself was going to be, was going to be tense. It was going to be stressful. People were going to, be using a new system to test in. They had to get familiar with that too. So I was like, why are we laying on top of this something else they need to learn? And I was really concerned that layering on this web-based product was going to supersede the effort of testing. Like, for example, I was worried I'd be running around trying to teach everyone to use this thing, dealing with user access, dealing with issues with this new system instead of dealing with testing the system that we're actually trying to test. You know what? That did not happen. Thankfully, that did not happen, and I was pleasantly surprised with how well it worked.
So since it was an electronic tool, did that require everyone to have their own workstation or computer?
Yes and no. So we did actually create like a central location for us to do our testing in. And we're two hospitals, so we decided to do our testing in our more aged hospital. So we didn't have training room. We actually took our education room where the business day before there were mannequin bodies all around for CPR that we had to get out of the room and actually build a testing room. So we had about 15 monitors in there, an additional access point. Actually, we had 15 computers and dual monitors because a lot of the testers were end users. So the end users being a nurse, a pharmacist, a lab technician, they didn't have offices with their own, desktops. So we did provide computers for them.
Testing it sometimes can be pretty stressful. What things did the professional services team do to keep the team members engaged throughout the process?
Well, they did a great job keeping them engaged. But I do want to point out that although we did have the computer room, I just want to circle back, we did actually have some users that were actually, because we're two hospitals, they weren't in the computer room. They actually were able to use the web-based product and test in their offices. In some cases, that the office was 20 miles away in another hospital. And that was something new with this parallel testing that we weren't able to do before. So I definitely wanted to mention that. But the second question about the testing and being intense and what help we had with that with professional services, we had a lot of help. I was very anxious the first day when we showed up Monday morning, and all these people, these strangers come in from lab and pharmacy. Some of them I've seen, some of them I've never seen before, and they're staring at you. Their boss said, show up here Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and you're going to test in here with these guys for a week. Well, they're in there. They're a little apprehensive. They're looking at us like, what are we supposed to be doing? So the first thing that Iatric did was they kind of took us out of it, our IT team out of it, and made everyone feel comfortable right up front. They set the tone right up front. They said, you know what, this might not be the funnest week of your life, but it might be intense. It might be interesting at times, but we are going to get through it, and we are going to try to have some fun. And I think that really helps setting the expectation up front.
You mean to tell me they tried to convince you could have fun during a week-long testing phase with multiple strangers in the same room?
Yep, believe it or not, actually, besides that first 15 minutes of getting settled in, I think I think folks did actually have fun and enjoy themselves. One of the things that happened is Iatric showed up on the first day, literally with a trunk full of snacks and drinks and coffee, and as everyone was kind of looking at themselves, not wondering what was going to happen this week, some of them haven't been exposed to testing before, you could see they were immediately at ease. Their comfort level, you could just see, they got more comfortable being there. They realized that, hey, you know what, these guys are going to take care of me. When you bring someone food and coffee and drink, they know they're going to be taken care of. And Iatric also did a real good job of, throughout the whole week, kind of emphasizing that process and emphasizing the need for mandatory breaks, for stretching. At some point, they actually, every day, they would actually require everyone to leave their testing station, step out of the room, and take a break. And I thought that was good. Some of them would take a walk, some of them would just take a break, but that was great. We also managed to have lunch for them several days a week. We made sure that it was not at their desk, so we provided a location outside of the testing area for that to happen. And just overall emphasize the importance to take breaks. And at the end of the week, as a final wrap-up, there was actually a celebration.
Wow, it almost sounds like an enjoyable time.
It was a fast week. The week went fast, and honestly, it did end up to be that way, to my surprise. They actually did some things that were kind of unique that I would not have thought of. They had prizes for those that were in the room for testing. They had a joke of the day. If it was answered, you would get a prize. They did something neat with the scenarios that were in the web-based system. They kind of hid some scenarios in the steps, and one of them might be, you've completed this step, please go report to so-and-so, and then when they did that, they would be rewarded with a prize. So it's kind of like a scavenger hunt in their scenario. It was great. All throughout the week, you could hear things went from a little bit of tension to some, you hear more laughter, and it was a more enjoyable process. That's not to say that we didn't stumble upon any issues in our testing, but that's why we were testing.
Did you want to share one of their jokes?
Oh, no, no way. Jokes were bad, but let me tell you, they did serve the purpose. They did actually ease the group and put folks at a more comfortable spot so they could test.
What other considerations was the professional services team able to assist with in either preparation or execution of the testing events?
I think for me it was a second set of eyes. Our team has been together as an organization for the most part. I've worked with some of these folks for 10 or 15 years. And it was nice to have somebody from the outside come in and tell them things that maybe I wouldn't have been able to. So I thought that was one of the key benefits there. And the other thing is that actually they provided, like I said, that second set of eyes. You know, we're experts at what we do, but you know, the last time we did a migration like this, we all swore this is the last time I'm ever going to do this. We wiped it from our brain and we moved on. So it was nice to have them come in and provide that additional expertise, the project management when it came to building the scenarios, to setting up the rooms, you know, just to, you know, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and making sure that we were looking at everything.
Well, that's great to hear. Do you have any final recommendations or advice you'd like to share with our audience?
Just that you can never perform enough testing, but don't burn out your team, because testing is really, the way I see it, it is that midway point. So you need to have the energy to make it through.
Well, thanks again, Steve, for your insight and great advice. I'm sure everyone appreciates it. Should anyone have any questions, would you mind taking those at the end of our presentation?
Sure, no problem.
All right, great. Well, Joe, aren't there other testing activities that could encourage a more thorough testing strategy beyond just these integration and parallel testing events?
All right, thank you, Dan. And boy, wow, thank you, Steve and Dan, for sharing their real-life example. And you can really hear the passion and the excitement around testing and how important that was to your success, Steve. Thank you again for that, sharing that story. And as Dan said, and I won't go too much into detail with this, but there's a lot of other types of testing that goes on with an EHR migration. As you just heard about parallel and integrated testing, there's also revenue cycle testing, testing running through claim checks, statement generations, remittance, posting of payments, that kind of thing. There's functional system test. So does the application work as designed within each individual application? There's medical device and analyzer testing, all kinds of equipment that is going to be hooked up in your organization. You need to really test the integration of that equipment with your EHR. End user device testing, making sure that everybody can get to the applications they need and their devices are working correct. That's typically done through something called a technical dress rehearsal, where you really are testing every device, every printer in the organization, and marking them as successful or not successful. There shouldn't be any surprises that go live in that something is not working, a device is not working. There's also system performance testing, response time testing. Sometimes a lot of that's done as a result of other training activities or other types of testing, but you definitely want to keep your eye on system performance and making sure the system is working as you would expect it to work. So the other area that we want to do a deeper dive in is, and focus on is workflow redesign and optimization. So this is really a great opportunity when you go through an EHR migration to really change the way that you operate and the way you use the system. Many organizations have their EHRs in place for 20, 30 years, and just over time it's just Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid, upgrade on top of upgrade, and you never really have a chance or an opportunity to start new, blow the whole thing up, and just rebuild it from scratch and do it the way that you really want to do it for today's efficiencies. So you want to do this redesign and optimization using an interdisciplinary approach, involve all the areas throughout the organization, emphasis again on patient safety and quality improvement. Again, the guiding principle should always be that that we're not going to harm a patient and that you want to keep the organization financially stable. Those two things are key. Want to improve the clinical workflows and processes. Look for the areas that cause pain, all your pain points. Look at your clinicians and examine, do they have to leave one system and log into another to look at data? Do they have to manually go to multiple systems to get their information? Is there information missing from patient records that reside in other systems? When you go through the re-engineering of the workflow and you work to maximize all the efficiency, that's when you identify, okay, what automation needs are unmet, and can we do something with the new HR to fix that, or and use internal functionality? Or sometimes we want to acquire third-party niche systems to provide some of the efficiency or automation that an EHR possibly can't provide. One example of that, and I want to bring Steve back into the conversation, at Upper Chesapeake, they selected a product called FlexButton to improve the clinician's workflow as they integrate with an HIE in Maryland called CRISP. So Steve, can you tell us a little bit about your decision to go with FlexButton and what specific challenges do you expect for it to solve for you?
Yeah, sure. More and more we're finding, particularly in our emergency department and other areas of the hospital where we receive patients, that a look out into our state HIE is becoming part of their workflow. So as a patient comes into the emergency room, one of the processes that's almost baked in now is that somebody goes into the state HIE and pulls their latest visits or their exams, their dictated reports from either other hospitals or from other outpatient centers or outpatient lab or imaging centers, which is all connected to our state HIE. We have a very robust state HIE. So as it's been part of that, we saw an opportunity to integrate that into their workflow. And by that I mean they're already going to be in our hospital EMR, and to actually have a mechanism to click a button while they've already identified the patient in the hospital EMR, and to use a single sign-on process to link out to the HIE and actually view the latest data there. The way that they have to do it now is they have to leave that application, log in through the HIE application. So this is actually going to kind of bake it into their workflow. And on top of that, when you have a doctor or a nurse or any type of care provider that's going out to the HIE, they're not sure really kind of necessarily what's new and what's not. So one of the things that we'll be looking for the FlexButton to do is to build some business rules around when we actually do open up the patient's chart in our EMR, the FlexButton will actually provide an indicator through either a change in color or a flashing that there is new data relevant out in the HIE. So that's going to hopefully save a whole lot of time, and the doctors and nurses are launching out there anyway. So a great opportunity for us to kind of streamline that workflow for them.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. That's a great example of a workflow redesign and a method of optimizing your EHR. So thank you for sharing that. So finally, the third area that we want to focus on and do a little deeper dive on is around interoperability and reporting. So when you migrate to a new EHR, there's a whole lot of third-party systems that you're going to need to interface to. And this could either be real-time HL7 interfaces, scripts, batch, extracting from one system and putting the information into a third-party system. A lot of various interfaces. Like I said before, there's a lot of medical devices now that are integrated to your EHR, smart pumps, lab analyzers, and point-of-care devices used in phlebotomy and other areas throughout the hospital. So a lot of interoperability that you'll need to build into your work plan as you migrate to the new EHR. You'll want to develop a good integration plan that has an inventory of all these various interfaces and all these various third-party systems. Many times you'll have to acquire an upgrade or do an upgrade to that third-party system. So one of the first things you have to do is make sure that you have a good inventory of all these various third-party systems, identify whether upgrades are necessary, and then do possibly contractual agreements or even purchases. Or you might need to develop the interfaces if they're in-house third-party systems, and there's not an integration package with that vendor. A lot of the testing that you'll have to plan for, this should all be on some kind of dashboard as you look at all the various systems and as they move through the progression of acquisition, development, testing, and ready for go live. The other area is around reporting. Can't underestimate how much importance reporting is to an EHR migration. It seems like it's always the forgotten child, but yet it's huge. Even though we're very paperless nowadays, there's still a lot of reports and forms that are necessary, and just to do a requirement analysis so that you understand, okay, what are the reports you must have on go live, 30 days out, 60 days out, etc., and who's going to develop those is very important. And so lastly, we have Tom Harlan with us from Iatric Systems, who's going to just do a little deeper dive and talk about reporting with an EHR migration. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. So we do lots and lots of outbound conversions and system conversions, particularly in the reporting area. And what we've seen is that if you are going to sort of a different platform of the same rough system, say you're going to Meditech 6, then entire modules are going to change out on you in terms of their fundamental architecture. And this isn't necessarily something that's really visible to you before you have gotten the test version of the new system. So when you do have the test version of the new system, you hopefully have done your reporting requirements analysis first so that you know what's going to have to switch. Then your reporting team, plus any extra resources that you bring into the picture, are going to have to look at that and say, which of these reports just need to be tweaked because the underlying data model is the same, but maybe a field gets added, a field gets removed. All that has to be checked out so those reports still run on go live. And then you have to pull out the ones that need to be completely rewritten. And sometimes that set of complete rewrites is way bigger than you expect. And in the Meditech environment specifically, if you're going to 6 or 615, you have to go through a triage step where you say, in this new environment, I have 3 different reporting tools. I have old NPR, which will only work for some reports now in some modules. I've got RD, which will work in the new modules, and then maybe I have the DR and SQL available as an extra option to get at my reports. And you need to break down which one of these is the best tool for this report. You can't assume that one tool is going to cover everything because it just won't. So we have a triage process with a workflow where we go through and look at each report and say, all right, this needs to be linked to a CDS. This has to go to a form. This has to generate a label or something. That's probably going to be out of either NPR or RD, depending on the base module. This one, though, is some kind of historical report where I have to look at maybe a year's worth of data or months' worth of data, and it's coming out of something like BAR or PCS where there's an enormous amount of data to process. Maybe I want to use the DR because we're looking at historical data and I can get better performance. So as you sort all of this out, you'll find your work in roughly 3 buckets, NPRs, RDs, and then DR SQL reports, and you can attribute that to the teams that are going to work on it. Now, we've got a point on this slide talking about delegating responsibility to the departments. Many times the departments do not actually know what reports they use in their workflow. If you've done a complete workflow analysis because you're going to rebuild workflow, as Joe just talked about, in that step, you want to pull out what reports are necessary. But fundamentally, you're going to get the best picture of what's used by pulling usage information out of the system, showing the number of times and by who reports were run. And then you use that to drive what reports are needed for go live, plus 30 days, plus 90 days, yearly, etc., and do your rebuild that way. The departments are going to be swamped with this migration. So the IT team, the project team, has to step in and pick up a lot of that in terms of providing them with lists, talking to them about prioritization, putting things into buckets, getting resources assigned to rebuild those reports. We're going to go through integrated testing. When you go through integrated and technical testing, you also need to be mindful that you're going to generate data, you're going to capture data at that step that will flow through to specific reports, and then those reports really need to be done before you get to that step so that you can confirm, yes, this medication did drop a charge and it went into the right bucket on this report, and we're getting the total that we expect to get. We've got a note down here at the bottom about Report Designer, and the thing that you must understand about Report Designer is that it takes a long time to build anything even of medium complexity in RD. So if you have report developers who are experienced with NPR or SQL or whatever, and they say, I think this will take me 4 hours, but that report is in the RD bucket, then you're looking at a lot more. You're looking at 3 times, 5 times, 10 times the amount of time. So just be mindful of that when you're working out your timelines and you're allocating resources. Joe, back to you.
All right, thank you, Tom. Yes, and I'm glad that Tom really went into the importance of testing, I mean reporting. It's definitely one of the main gotchas in an EHR migration. Seems like nobody thinks about reports until the very end, and then you're scrambling to get everything done. So thank you, Tom. That was great. And that really concludes the 3 areas that we wanted to focus on, in addition to all of the other components that we touched on. Amanda, I don't know how much time we have for questions and answers and what's out there in chat, but I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I do want to remind everybody that if you do have a question, please feel free to enter it in the questions section of your control panel. We do have a couple of questions here. We'll start with this one. We're in the middle of a migration. Is it too late to start some of these types of testing?
Great question for Dan.
Yep. It's never too late. You know, you could even be going live today and still do some form of testing. Again, we do testing to make sure that we can mitigate as many issues before you go live as much as possible. So certainly it's never too late, and if you're in the middle, you're probably right on target with normal implementation guidelines.
Okay, and our next question is, can you talk about at what point in our migration should we be looking to optimize the rest of our workflow?
Sure, I can take that one. So, optimization and redesigning is going to happen throughout the entire migration. Really, you want to try to identify as much as you can up front when you're working through your scoping and you're identifying and documenting your requirements. But as you begin to build the system and you work through testing, you're also going to identify opportunities and ways to optimize and change things. You just want to make sure that you have the policies and procedures and the governance and organization to address those changes as they occur throughout the project. So who's going to approve, what does get changed, and that kind of thing. And then, of course, after you go live, optimization never really ends. You really do work on optimizing the system ongoing.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And we are just about at the top of the hour. We have probably less than a minute, so that's all the questions we have. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So I would like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. As I mentioned in the opening, you will have the opportunity to fill out a short survey. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. The survey will appear when you leave the webinar. For your time, your name will be entered into a drawing to win a $100 Amazon.com gift card. And again, all of these drawings are held at the end of each month. Please follow us on social media and our blogs for healthcare IT updates and to interact with your peers. If you would like more information, please contact your Iatric Systems account executive, or you can send an email to info@iatric.com. I'd like to thank our panel of speakers and also once again thank everyone who took the time to join us. I hope you have a great day, and this concludes our webinar.